Hope it won't get too boring for you, but let's take a ride through history. Welcome to the timeline. In 1972, Magnavox released the Odyssey. Atari or Sears released Pong machines. A lot of different Pong clones. Fairchild released Channel F. Mattel released Football. First video game that fits in the bag. Apple released Apple. The home computer industry was born. Commodore then released the PET 2001, the first complete home computer. Tandy Radio Shack also released the TRS-80. Atari released their VCS 2600, which was dominating the video game systems for 1970s and until 1980. Philips released the Odyssey 2, also known as the G7000. Interton released their VC4000, the video game console from Germany. I have that one. Atari released their 400 and 800 series. Novak released the Chess Champion Super System. Mattel released their Intellivision. MB released their Microvision, the first programmable handheld. Texas Instruments released their TI-994, the first home computer with a 16-bit processor. VEB Halbleiterwerk Frankfurt released the BSS-01 from DDR. Nintendo released the Game & Watch. Commodore released the VIC-20. Coleco released Galaxian, an arcade-like thingy for home. IBM released Personal Computer, PC, a standard was born. Sinclair released the CX-81. Commodore released the Commodore 64, one of the most sold computers of all times. Coleco then released the ColecoVision. MB released Vectrex, the only video game with a built-in vector motor. Sinclair released the CX Spectrum. Atari released the 600XL and the 800XL. That was Atari's answer to the Commodore 64. There was different MSXs. Schneider or Amstrad released the CPC. It was an 8-bit. And Apple Macintosh, the computer with a mouse. Commodore released the Amiga. Nintendo released the Famicom, also known as the NES, the Nintendo Entertainment System. Atari released the Atari ST, an abbreviation for 1632, because it had a 16-bit bus and a 32-bit CPU. The Atari ST was the first that came with a bitmap color GUI. Atari released the 7800. VEP Robotron released the KC-87. Sega released the Mark III Master System. Chibo released Telefever. VEP Microelectronic released the KC-85-3. NEC released the PC Engine. And Atari released the XE Gaming System. The Sega released Mega Drive. Nintendo released the Game Boy. Atari released the Lynx, the first handheld with a color screen. SNK released Neo Geo. Nintendo came out with the Super Famicom, or the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. It was Nintendo's late 16-bit answer. Philips released the CDI, the Multimedia Time Age Begins. Sega released their Game Gear. Commodore released the Amiga CD32, the first video console with a 32-bit. Atari released the Jaguar, the first 64-bit console. 3DO or Panasonic released the 3DO or Panasonic FC10. Sony released the PlayStation. Sega released the Saturn. So the battle of the next generation consoles begins. Nintendo released the Nintendo 64. Sega released their Dreamcast, which was the first 128-bit console. SNK released Neo Geo Pocket Color Japan thing. Sony released their PlayStation 2, the first console with a DVD thingy. Early 2000, it's also important to remember that phone games became a trend. Nintendo released Game Boy Advance, and the GameCube. Microsoft released the Xbox. This was America striking back. Nintendo released the Nintendo DS. Sony released the PlayStation Portable. Microsoft released the Xbox 360, which included HDMI. Sony released the PlayStation 3, which also contains HDMI. Nintendo released the Wii. Sony released their PlayStation Portable Go. Microsoft released their Xbox 360 Slim. Nintendo released the Nintendo 3DS and Wii U. Sony released the PlayStation Vita. Sony released their PlayStation 4. Microsoft released their Xbox One. Which brings us back to today.